This is a continuous improvement movement reserved for the few with the grit to prove it. Everybody.
Good morning, this is Maria, and I am here with my co-host Calvin Williams, and this is the Ticket to Freedom podcast, where we discuss continuous improvement as it pertains to current events. Today, we are going to talk about an article released by Forrester, and the article is titled Red Flags Revealed, Navigating the Path to B2B Operational Excellence. So Calvin, operational excellence is built around robust processes. What is your take on that?
When I hear that, what first comes to mind is Taiichi Ono's quote that says, without standards, there can be no improvement. And standards are basically everybody doing the same process in the same way, essentially. You can only imagine, especially in the B2B world where quality is paramount, and quality in the sense of the product or the output being the exact same way every time, because in B2B, they're probably going to use your output as an input for their process. And if you can imagine, everybody doing the process differently and then trying to create the same output every time, you'd have essentially chaos, right? And the reason you need to have standards in order to drive improvement is because if everybody's doing it differently, how do you step forward, right? What are you stepping forward from? So that consistency across the board enables everyone to step forward together toward improvement. The other note I'll add about standardization and how companies typically use standards versus how, the ideal way to use standards, right? Most companies understand and most leaders understand that a good standard is a great training tool to teach a new employee or new worker how to do a job in much less time than trying to figure it out on their own. And of course, better quality, better productivity, and all the rest. But standards have actually serve a different purpose, especially around continuous improvement. And I know at Toyota, they do this, and Toyota people will testify to this, is the way a supervisor could, in an ideal world, use a standard is take the standard, go observe the work using the standard, and see if the worker follows the process. And if they don't follow the process, it might be for a couple of reasons. One, the standard's wrong, or two, the process is wrong. There's something broken about the process that needs to be addressed. So if a worker's not following a standard, the typical response, especially in the US and in the West, is let's force the worker to follow the standard or hold the worker accountable and that kind of thing. Another way to look at that is if the worker's not following the standard, they've had to find a workaround to the standard procedure. Then the question is, what's wrong with the process or the product, or what's wrong that is causing them to deviate? Then let's go and improve the process so it becomes easier to follow the standard, or perhaps there's a need for a different standard, right? Let's improve the standard so that it actually matches the way the worker's doing it if they actually found a better way. So just a couple thoughts there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that is such an important approach, not just when it comes to analyzing processes, but also dealing with people, period. Focus on processes, not the person, right? So
Absolutely.
Here, in this example, you're focusing on the person, trying to make them comply with a standard that might not even be the right standard for the situation.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, and when you're dealing with workplace situations, it's the same. Focusing on the process, not the person. It solves a lot of problems.
I guess the way to think about that is once a person has been trained and they kind of understand the way they should do the job, then the standard becomes a tool of the supervisor, not necessarily the worker, right? And it becomes a continuous improvement tool for the supervisor to seek opportunities for improvement of the process.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And Calvin, there are a few red flags that people can look for to identify if a process is in trouble. So here is the list of red flags. So first, we have processes inefficiently designed and documented. Number two, processes undergoing constant change. Number three, processes lacking clear roles, expectations, and accountability. Number 4, processes missing end-to-end workflows by participant role. Number 5, processes deprived of adequate compliance. And number 6, processes not being measured. What is your experience with this type of red flags?
It's a great list. There's a lot there to process. I would say the one that really jumps out at me is number 3. I think it's something like doesn't have responsibilities and expectations and roles very well defined, accountability and that kind of thing. I think step 1 really is to define a process owner. And a lot of time, if you're again going back to standards, if you're going to create a standard work for a process, one of the fields on any standard work document should be the owner. Who owns that process? And when you have an owner, and I'm a big fan of single point of accountability, SPA, we sometimes call it. When you have an owner, that person can then help drive and shore up all the other boxes, like, is the process being checked or measured? Is there compliance to the process? What's the escalation protocol if there's a deviation from standard? Is there a standard procedure to begin with? And all the rest. So yeah, once you define an owner, then a bunch of those other boxes can be checked just off of that, because a responsible owner is going to make sure all those other things are being done. The other part of that is if you don't define an owner, and you just say, hey, everybody's responsible, that's the same thing as saying nobody's responsible. So, yeah, it's just like saying, hey, we're going to focus on everything. It's the same as saying, we're not really focusing on anything. So
You lose your point of accountability.
you lose your point of accountability. You lose your point of focus. You don't know who to follow up with if something's going wrong. You create a finger pointing situation, around accountability. So yeah, assign an owner, and the other things tend to fall in order.
What other red flags do you think we missed in this list that might be important?
There's a few. The one that jumps out at me right away is the role of leadership in driving a culture of operational excellence, and even driving orientation toward processes, right? I know I harp on this a lot because, I've been in the field long enough to know all the things that can go wrong. And, the biggest thing that tends to go wrong is distraction, too many, competing interests, and poor alignment, and, people not seeing the bigger picture, right? Not putting the North Star as the highest priority. And I think a lot of that comes down to leadership commitment to continuous improvement. Right. Leaders have a lot of pressures on them, and they got to hit numbers. And if you're a publicly traded company, you need to hit immediate numbers, right? We're talking quarter over quarter, right? And continuous improvement is a long-term perspective. And many leaders aren't even in their role for longer than 2 or 3 years or 4 years, right? So CI is a long-term perspective. It's winning the ultimate war, right? And most leaders are just focused on winning the battle short term. So you got to have almost a perspective that looks beyond yourself and your immediate situation as a leader, and say, let me make choices and let me make investments in the long-term growth and improvement and viability and survivability of the organization. And a lot of the stuff, as a leader, you could say, hey, let me create a standard procedure, or you could say, you know what, let me just get production done today and worry about standard procedures later, right? Those are the kind of choices that a leader that's committed to continuous improvement would say, let's stop the line, let's fix the issue, let's create the standard, and then let's restart it, right? A leader that's not committed to, and I say line as if it's a production environment, but it applies in every environment: healthcare, service, all the rest, government, education, et cetera. So a leader that's not committed would say, put a Band-Aid on it, get today's job done, we'll deal with it tomorrow, right? And what happens when you do that is just today's problems compound with tomorrow's problems, compound with next week's problems, compound with next month's problems, right? And it just turns into a culture of chaos. And in a B2B environment, you got to put quality as a paramount, which means you might have to take a hit today, call it an investment, take it today, get it right, and then get back going once it's right. So it's a very different mentality, and it translates into a true culture of CI versus a culture of status quo and perhaps worse.
I agree. And I think companies are realizing the importance of leadership involvement. And that's why, and we were discussing this a couple days ago, that's why more roles are being created for operational excellence at the C level to be able to drive continuous improvement in these initiatives, because there are so many competing, interests and just things that require the leader's attention. But I think people realize that without the leader involvement, you don't have the culture, you can't solve the problems, you can't go fast enough. So it's a very interesting point to kind of direct our attention to a little bit more and find the solutions that are needed to really establish or to really enable continuous improvement.
Absolutely.
So in conclusion, processes drive performance, and you have to standardize processes to enable continuous improvement. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much for joining us. Let's get better every day, and I'll see you back tomorrow. For daily news on operational excellence and how it relates to current events, check us out on the Ticket to Freedom podcast.
Simply subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay up to date on the latest developments in continuous improvement.